once lived a man named Job, and oh, what a joyful, thankful, kind-hearted man he was. Job loved God with all his heart. He trusted God completely, and he made sure his whole family knew how important it was to love God too. The Bible tells us in the book of Job, chapters 1 and 2, that Job was a man who lived a good, honest life. He didn't cheat, he didn't lie, and he didn't try to hurt anyone. Instead, he helped the poor, shared what he had, and prayed many times every day. Job was also very blessed. God had given him a big, happy family, 7 sons and 3 daughters who loved to gather together and celebrate. They would have big family meals with food, laughter, and warm hugs. Job loved his children so much that after every celebration, he would pray for them and ask God to keep their hearts pure. He wanted his family to always stay close to God. And Job didn't just have a big family, he had many animals too. He had thousands of sheep, camels, oxen, donkeys, and many helpers who worked on his land. In those days, this meant Job was very wealthy. Everyone in the whole region knew Job as the greatest man in the East. But even with all his blessings, Job stayed humble. He never bragged. He always thanked God for every good thing he had. Far above the earth, something very important was happening, something Job couldn't see. One day, the angels came before God, and among them came Satan. God asked him, "Where have you come from?" And Satan answered, "From roaming through the earth." God smiled and asked, "Have you noticed my servant Job? There is no one like him. He is good and faithful. He loves what is right and stays away from what is wrong." But Satan sneered, shaking his head. "Of course he loves you. You give him everything. You protect him, bless him, and make everything in his life wonderful. But take away his blessings, and he will stop loving you." God knew Job's heart. He knew Job didn't love him because of blessings. Job loved him because Job truly knew God. So God said, "Very well, Job is in your hands, but do not harm him." Satan left, ready to cause trouble. But even though Job didn't know what was happening in heaven, God knew everything, and God had a plan. One day, Job's children were having one of their big happy meals at the oldest brother's house. Everything seemed peaceful, and Job was probably thinking about what prayer he would say for them later. Suddenly, a servant came running to Job, panting and frightened. "Master, the oxen were working in the field and the donkeys were grazing nearby when some enemies attacked and stole everything. They killed the servants. I am the only one who escaped to tell you." Job listened, stunned, but before he could speak, another servant ran in. "Fire from the sky fell and burned all your sheep and the shepherds. I am the only one who escaped." Job's heart sank, but still, he listened. A third servant rushed in. Enemies raided the camels and carried them off. More servants were killed. I alone escaped to tell you. Job felt dizzy. This was too much. But before he could catch his breath, a fourth servant ran in crying, "Master, your sons and daughters were feasting at the oldest brother's house when a strong wind struck the house. It collapsed, and they are all gone. I am the only one who escaped." Job's world went silent. His children, his precious children were gone, his animals were gone, his workers were gone, everything he owned had disappeared in just moments. It felt as if the whole world had crashed on top of him. But what Job did next amazed everyone. He stood up slowly, tears falling down his face. He tore his robe in sadness, fell to the ground, and bowed before God. His voice trembled as he prayed. "You, Lord, gave me everything I had, and you have the right to take it away. I will still praise you. I came into the world with nothing, and I will leave with nothing. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Even after losing everything, Job did not blame God. He didn't shout angrily. He didn't say, "Why me?" He simply trusted that God was still good, still loving, still worthy of praise. Far above in heaven, God saw Job's faith and was proud. But Satan wasn't finished. He appeared again before God. God asked, "Have you noticed Job? Even though you made me allow trouble to come to him, he still loves me." But Satan said, "Yes, but if you hurt his body, he will curse you." God replied, "Very well, Job is in your hands, but you must not take his life." Satan left, determined to hurt Job. Soon painful sores covered Job from his head to his feet. His skin burned, itched, and hurt so badly that Job sat on an ash pile and scraped his skin with a broken piece of pottery just to feel a tiny bit better. Even then, Job didn't give up. His wife, heartbroken and overwhelmed by the tragedy, came to him and said, "Are you still holding on to your faith? Curse God and die." But Job shook his head. "No," he said gently. "We accept blessings from God. Shouldn't we also accept difficult times?" He still trusted God. 3 of Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, heard about his suffering and came to visit him. When they saw him from a distance, they almost didn't recognize him. They cried and tore their robes in sadness. For 7 days, they sat with Job in silence. They didn't say a word because they saw how great his suffering was. And that is where Job's story becomes even more important. Job wasn't perfect. He didn't always understand what was happening. Sometimes he felt confused, hurt, and deeply sad. But through it all, Job kept holding on to God, even when everything seemed dark and hopeless. As the days passed, Job began to speak. He cried out to God with honest tears. He asked questions. He wondered why such terrible things had happened. His friends tried to explain it, but they were wrong. They said it must have been Job's fault, but it wasn't. Little by little, God would show Job something very important, something about who he is, and how deeply he loves his children, even in the hardest moments. Job's friends sat with him for many days. At first, they stayed quiet, but eventually they began to speak. They tried to explain Job's suffering by saying things that weren't true. They told him that people who live good lives never face trouble, and that only the wicked suffer. Job listened with a heavy heart. He knew he loved God. He knew he tried to do what was right. And deep inside, he knew this wasn't happening because he had done something wrong. Job began to speak to God honestly, the way a child speaks to a parent he trusts. He didn't hide his feelings or pretend to be strong. He said, "Lord, I don't understand. Why is this happening to me?" He cried, he trembled, and he felt confused. But Job never stopped believing that God was still there. As time passed, Job's friends argued with him. They insisted he must have sinned terribly, but they were mistaken. Job said, "I wish I could speak to God. I wish he would explain. I know he sees me." Job believed that even if he could not understand the reason for his suffering, God understood him. Job felt alone, but he wasn't alone. God was watching. God heard every tear, every word, every sigh. And soon, God would answer Job in a way that Job would never forget. One day, as Job sat in ashes with his heart full of questions, a powerful wind began to blow. The sky darkened, thunder rumbled. Then, from the middle of a mighty whirlwind, God spoke. Job froze, his breath caught in his chest. God's voice wasn't angry, it was mighty, wise, strong, and filled with love. It echoed across the sky and into Job's heart. "Job," God said, "where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you understand, who tells the seas to stop where they do? Who gives orders to the morning or shows the sun where to rise? Have you ever walked at the bottom of the sea or seen the storehouses of snow?" God's voice rolled like gentle thunder, not to frighten Job, but to remind him of something precious, that God is powerful beyond imagination, wise beyond understanding, and present in every moment of life. God continued, "Job, who feeds the lions? Who helps the deer give birth? Who stretches the sky, fills the rivers, and paints each sunrise? Do you know how the stars stay in place? Tell me, if you know." Job listened with wide eyes and a trembling heart. With each word he understood more and more. God sees everything. God knows everything. God holds the whole world in his hands. And if God could take care of the universe, then he could take care of Job too. Job bowed his head, tears falling gently. "Lord," he said softly, "I spoke of things too wonderful for me. I didn't understand, but now I see you. Now I know you are always good, always wise, and always near. I trust you." God was pleased with Job. Job had been honest, he had been real, and even when he didn't understand why things were happening, he kept holding on to faith. God then turned to Job's 3 friends, who had spoken wrongly. God told them to offer a sacrifice and let Job pray for them. Job prayed for his friends, forgiving them kindly. And then something beautiful happened. God restored Job. God blessed Job even more than before. He gave Job twice as many animals as he once had. He gave him more camels, more sheep, more oxen, more donkeys, and more helpers. His land flourished again. The nights felt peaceful again. His home was full of songs and laughter again. And then God blessed Job with something even more precious. Job and his wife had more children, 7 sons and 3 daughters, just as before. The Bible tells us that Job's daughters were the most beautiful in all the land, and Job loved them dearly. He gave them gifts and included them in everything, showing them kindness all their lives. Job lived a long, joyful life. He stayed faithful, grateful, and full of peace. He lived 140 more years, long enough to see his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and the next generation after them. When Job finally left the world, he went with a full heart, knowing God had been with him the entire time, through joy and through sorrow. And the Bible says that Job died old and full of days, which means he lived a life completely filled with love, faith, family, and the goodness of God. Moral lesson. Children, Job's story teaches us that even when life gets hard, and even when we don't understand why things happen, we should still trust God. God is always watching, always loving, and always working things out for our good. God never leaves us, not in sad days, not in confusing days, and not in happy days. Just like Job, we can trust God no matter what, because God is always faithful.